Remarkable timing, because I already said we previously spoke with our friends here in the panel. You know, this is our shot, and this year, this issue that has been dragged for so many years, I think we have a serious opportunity now to finally create a fix. It is very important, not only in the context of dealing with the issue itself, but also in the context of achieving peace in the future, because these bubbles that have been created, artificial bubbles that have been created in the long decades of the conflict. For example, one of them about Jerusalem, which the president so smartly, I think, punctured. And this issue of refugees have been really an impediment to achieving peace in the region. And what we need in order to narrow the gaps, to make us find a solution. No doubt, those include dealing with those fantasies, the gap between fantasy and reality in our region. So as we saw in the last few weeks, there was a census in Lebanon that showed that actually the actual number of descendants of Palestinians is less than half, or maybe a third, than what was stated by UNRWA. So the Prime Minister has been very clear on what he wants to see. He wants to see this issue not treated like a different issue, but a current issue. There are pressing problems with refugees in the region, and those who are descendants from refugees, which are not only the Palestinians, but are also Israelis that came from our world, we have to find a smarter way of dealing with them. So people are asking us, okay, how practically are we going to achieve that? Because probably you are not going to be able to convince the UN or the General Assembly or anybody else to change that because they are biased, completely biased. And our answer is very simple. First of all, there is already a crisis with UNRWA, because even before the president has come out with a statement, we knew that they entered their financial year with deficit, and that this year, even those who are declaring that they are willing to step up to the plate and give money to UNRWA are cutting their budget to UNRWA. Not only are countries who are fed up of sending money to this organization, but also European countries that actually have cut. For example, the Dutch have declared that they're going to give money to UNRWA ahead of time, but the sum that they're giving is actually smaller than what they gave in the past. So this is a pressing issue, and we are not talking here about reforming UNRWA. What we are talking here about is a situation in which we have to differentiate between the needy people that we want to assist them, especially in the humanitarian situation in Gaza, okay, and how organizationally you're going to go about it. People are talking all the time that the Palestinian Authority should be empowered because Israel also supports Palestinian self-rule, but they don't trust the Palestinian Authority to handle those schools, to handle those services to the Palestinian population. And our question is very simple. If you don't trust the Palestinian Authority to do these services, you are asking us to trust the Palestinian Authority to keep our security. So this is an infantilization of the Palestinians. We have to be in a situation, and we can start very easily in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank. There are vast areas in which you have refugee camps, so-called refugee camps, under the control of the Palestinian Authority, full control of the Palestinian Authority. They should start being responsible for those areas. Because under their way of thinking, this is going to be anyway, the future Palestinian state. That's what they believe in. So start assuming responsibility. So there's no logic whatsoever that the international assistance to the Palestinian Authority has gone down, but the budget of UNRWA has kept going down. But we have to shift this. We have to make the Palestinians accountable. We have to stop infantilizing them. Okay? And the way of doing this is by telling them, look, this situation cannot continue. You have to assume responsibility. If you are not capable of rendering services to your own population, the world is not going to do it for you. Okay? So that's my short remark. Thank you very much.
So much. Until the Palestinians agree to come to the negotiating table. On January 16th, President Trump, on the advice of Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, agreed to transfer $60 million for now, as opposed to slashing the entire funding overnight. But the other $65 million has been held in reserve. So this is just one installment. The total amount of money paid to UNRWA by the United States taxpayers each year is approximately $370 million. Upon informing the agency of its decision, the Trump administration has called for, quote, a fundamental re-examination of the agency. And that's what we're here to do today. And there is a great deal to re-examine. UNRWA, which was established in the wake of the Arab-Israeli War of 1948 to take care of the Palestinian refugee problem, began its operations on May 1st, 1950. That means that this spring, UNRWA will be 68 years old. In the absence of a solution to the refugee problem, UNRWA continues to renew its mandate and thus redefines over and over and over again the word refugee to mean anyone who is a descendant of the 1948 war. Thus, from the original 600,000 to 700,000 refugees, UNRWA now claims approximately 5 million Palestinian refugees. My father came to the United States before I was born, fleeing Hitler. Does that mean that I, my children, and my grandchildren are refugees? I was very proud to be born in this country and to consider myself an American citizen. This is the only refugee agency in the world whose mission is not for refugees to be immediately resettled, integrated, and to enter the workforce of their host countries, but whose mission is to instill in the minds of their population that they will one day go back to their great-grandfathers, great-grandfathers, or great-great-grandfathers' orchards and vineyards in Haifa. To us, at ANET, this agency's conduct, although dressed up in the benevolent clothing of a welfare agency, borders on immoral, because it implants within this population an unrealistic expectation, or as Ambassador Ruben Azar says, a fantasy within the population that only serves to keep the conflict alive. Not only does it perpetuate a psychology of victimhood, it entraps those that are being serviced by UNRWA into a perpetual state of poverty and a culture of dependency, rather than living in the reality of today and getting on with their lives. So they are trapped into perpetually reliving the conflict of 1948, and thereby they are perpetuating the state of war. I'd like to call your attention to an excellent brand new study of the UNRWA textbooks published by the Center for Near East Policy Research, which you can all find at IsraelBehindTheNews.com. This study found that for decades now, UNRWA has used textbooks that delegitimize and demonize the state of Israel and the very presence of Jews there, and advocates for violent struggle, rather than for peaceful coexistence within the Jewish state. This is totally ironic, coming from the United Nations, whose very charter speaks about one, practicing tolerance and living together with one another as good neighbors, two, reaffirming faith in fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of every human person, and the equal rights of men and women in nations large and small, three, establishing conditions for justice and respect for international treaties and international law, and four, employing international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all peoples. How these UNRWA counts and their hate-infested educational system can be an agency of the United Nations with its lofty founding principles continues to baffle me. So here to discuss this critically important issue are some of the greatest minds. Daniel Pipes is the founder of the Middle East Forum. He got both his BA and his PhD from Harvard University. He has written more than 12 books and thousands of articles. and he is absolutely, I think, the preeminent scholar in the world when it comes to all issues of the Middle East. Ambassador Richard Shifter has served in many administrations, the Clinton and Reagan administration, dealing in issues of human rights. He is now the founder of the American Jewish International Relations Institute, which has a wonderful mission, and I'm proud to be serving as a member of his board of directors. And he got his law degree from Yale University and was a partner of Fried Harris, is that it? Law firm here in Washington, D.C. And Asaf Romarowski not only is a scholar of UNRWA, I think you got your PhD in London, King's College, is that it? And he not only is a scholar, but he is actually the only person here to have served in the IDF as a representative for the UNRWA camps. Is that true? I might have butchered that a bit, so you could correct me. Feel free to. Okay, so without further ado, I think Congressman Perry is on a very tight schedule. Would like to just speak first for a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. And from my vantage point, I'm privileged to be among you and among two people that I really admire just greatly. I mean, Daniel Pipes is a giant in this forum, not only in stature but in intellect and voice. And even though she may be small in stature, there's a huge voice and a huge force in Sarah Stern, and I just can't tell you how privileged I am to be here and to be with them, right? And if you haven't heard of, you should know and tell your friends. And I'm amazed that every day, including this day, when I met. A day when I got the privilege to see again Ambassador Dermer, I talked to some other folks that had never heard of Emmett. And I said, how can this be? But literally I didn't know a year and a half or two ago as well. So this is a day, this is a forum that I'm privileged to sponsor and have you here. And thank you very much for coming and informing and educating. I get calls all day long about people that are angry about a lot of things. I was just lamenting, I just got off the phone with an individual, one of my constituents who's mad about the gas prices, but doesn't understand that we spend $365–8 million a year to support an organization that kills Jews and Americans and Westerners and pays them to do it, right? That our tax dollars go for textbooks that don't even recognize Israel. This cannot be. So I would just recount one story and then I'll get the heck out of here and let the experts talk about this. When the new administration came in, and I'm a fan of Nikki Haley, and I've become more of a fan, I will tell you, over time. But I talked to her when she originally came in about one issue, and it was UNRWA. And I said, this has got to change, and we need your support, we need your help, and we seem to be of like mind. But then last summer at a hearing, I pushed on it a little harder, and I asked for some action, and she said, well, we're not quite there yet. And she was kind of mincing words and somewhere in the middle about all the great things UNRWA does. Well, I got right on that, and I will tell you, I'm very pleased to see the President, this administration's action at withholding some of that money. There's an opportunity for a conversation. We can turn the corner here, and we have got to, while this opportunity is in front of us, get not only financial things dealt with, but also policy goals, and that's what these folks are here to talk to you about today. So I'm privileged to be with you. Thank you for attending. Get the information. Go out and spread it among all your neighbors so everybody knows what is happening to their tax dollars, this travesty that cannot go on any further. We can't have changed 750,000 refugees to 5.2 million. There's an organization at the UN that deals with refugees, right? We don't need another one, right? For 68 years, we pay and pay and pay, and nothing gets better. So God bless you. All right, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the administration's decision to withhold some of the payments scheduled for disbursement to UNRWA has drawn attention to a UN body that may be one of the most important obstacles to an Arab-Israeli peace agreement. UNRWA, we need to note, now serves 5.3 million people, less than 1% of whom are Palestinian refugees from the 1948-49 war that followed the creation of the State of Israel. More than 99% are descendants of such refugees. The claim is now made that they all have the right to live in Israel. It's called the right of return. The fact is that there's no such right under legal principles. But the mere claim of such a right most certainly interferes with the peace process. UNRWA plays a key role in advancing that claim. Creating an obstacle to a peace agreement was certainly not the intent of the sponsors of the resolutions under which UNRWA was created. On the contrary, it was to serve a humanitarian purpose. Resolution 212, which was adopted by the General Assembly in October 1948, but Israel's war of independence was still ongoing, stated the issue that was to be addressed by the UN in the following words: the problem of the relief of Palestine refugees of all communities is one of immediate urgency. Action must be taken to determine the necessary measures of relief and provide for their implementation. The choices between saving the lives of many thousands of people now or permitting them to die. It was with that mandate in mind that the UN Secretary General engaged in the preparatory work for the creation of UNRWA. That event took place in December 1949 under the provisions of Resolution 302. It is critically important to note the two missions that were to be performed by UNRWA under Resolution 302. A, to collaborate with local governments in relief and works programs, and two, to consult with these governments to prepare for the time when international assistance for relief and works projects is no longer available. What is thus quite clear is that UNRWA was founded to save the lives of the refugees by providing immediate assistance, leaving a longer-range problem of their care to the local governments. There's another point to note. The phrase Palestine refugees of all communities was used to cover all refugees from Palestinian Mandate territory, including Jews who fled from areas that were incorporated into Jordan, many of them fleeing from East Jerusalem. When UNRWA started operating, it functioned indeed in both the Arab states and Israel. In Israel, it provided assistance both for Jewish refugees from Jordan and Arab refugees who had lost their homes during the war but continued to live on territory that had become part of the State of Israel. It was in 1954 that Israel assumed full responsibility for supporting these refugees, both Arabs and Jews, relieving UNRWA of that responsibility. While Israel took responsibility for the refugees living within its territory, the same was not true of the Arab states. And here we get to the essence of the problem. Though a series of armistice agreements were signed in 1949 between Israel and its Arab neighbors, no peace agreements were signed at that time. The countries remained in a state of war, and the Arab states remained committed to ending the existence of the State of Israel. If the State of Israel were to be liquidated, the refugees were quite obviously expected to return to the places where they had lived before the war. It followed that there was no good reason to seek to resettle them in the Arab states in which they were living. The right of return was claimed for them. It is worth noting at this point that in 1950 the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees was created. That office was to take care of all refugees worldwide except the refugees served by UNRWA. The High Commissioner was committed to the goal of resettling refugees and focused principally on that goal, being largely successful in attaining it. UNRWA, by contrast, provided social health and educational services for refugees from Palestinian Mandate who had fled the Arab states. One of them, Jordan, did allow them to qualify for citizenship and otherwise integrate, but that was not in keeping with Arab League policy. And once the PLO was established, integration was certainly strongly opposed by that organization. Given the increasingly important role played in UNRWA from the 1950s onward by members of the Arab League, and given the League's ability to assert itself in the UN system, no serious questions were raised by anyone about the fact that there was no effort to integrate Palestinian refugees into the countries in which they live under UNRWA auspices. The claim of the right of return was full justification for maintaining refugee status for refugees served by UNRWA. But as the years passed and refugees got older and died, the question arose as to how to maintain the claim of the right of return in a way that could lead to the ending of the existence of the State of Israel. That led to the decision, again heavily influenced by the Arab League, to define a refugee for UNRWA purposes as not only including people who had fled from their homes, but their descendants along the male line as well. It is as a result of this redefinition of the word refugee that UNRWA now serves the 5.3 million people. Let us note that the migration of these 5.3 million people, if added to the 1.8 million Palestinians who now live in Israel, would turn Israel into a majority Arab state, thus ending Israel's existence. It is clear that no government of Israel will be prepared to enter into an agreement under which its country would be liquidated. The question is therefore whether the Palestinian negotiators would be prepared to sign an agreement under which they give up their claim for a right of return. Mahmoud Abbas has made it clear that he would not do that. The way he's put it is no right to give away the right of other people. Let us now note that in May of this year, the State of Israel will celebrate the 70th anniversary of its creation. Why should the leadership of the Palestinian Authority still think that it can arrange the liquidation of the State of Israel? Hamas, to be sure, believes it can attain that result by force. But why should the funded leaders who are supposed to be moderates believe they can accomplish that goal without a massive military effort? I submit that the answer to this question is that they believe that the UN will ultimately accept their demands. If the UN is prepared to spend billions to maintain UNRWA, an organization consisting of descendants, including great-grandchildren of refugees, for decade after decade, can it be expected ultimately to compel Israel to solve the problem rather than supporting many more millions of people? Compelling Israel to solve the problem would be done through the Security Council resolution under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, instructing Israel to accept the mass immigration of the millions on the UNRWA list. Let me add that the right of return claim UNRWA is reinforced by the resolutions that maintain the claims for the Committee on the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People and the Division of Palestinian Rights. The claim is an important theme taught to students in the schools operated by UNRWA. Expecting the Security Council directive to Israel to accept 5.3 million people on the UNRWA list means that one assumes that the United States will not veto such a resolution. But the fact that leaders seem to think is that if they continue to work the UN system as they've worked it successfully for decades, they will ultimately be able to isolate the United States to the point where we will just give in. The Palestinian leaders have for a long time analogized Israel to apartheid South Africa. They are aware that for many years the Security Council was not able to get the needed vote pattern to have a resolution against apartheid adopted. But it finally did get adopted, and the life of the apartheid state was brought to an end by the UN. The Palestinian leaders believe if they keep working the UN system, they can get the institution to end the existence of Israel as well. UNRWA's very existence is thus the major obstacle to a peace agreement. The call for a Palestinian state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea is based on it. It follows that if the U.S. government is to succeed in advancing the two-state solution, we must arrange for a program to resettle the people on the UNRWA list in countries other than Israel. And UNRWA needs to be liquidated.
I've devoted a significant amount of my research dealing with UNRWA for the past 20 years, and I wrote a book on this topic. And so there's a lot happening now, obviously policy-wise, that is bringing a lot of the research that I've looked at for many years together. So it's an exciting time on that front. Just to add a little bit of more context to Ambassador Schufter's points that I think are worth noting on this matter as we're looking forward to how to deal with the UNRWA issue at large. One of the more famous quotes on this issue within the Zionist historiography, and it really deals with UNRWA's mandate at large, is attributed to one of the former heads of UNRWA in Amman in the early 1950s, Sir Alexander Galloway. The quote goes along these lines, and I quote here, "The Arab states don't want to solve the refugee problem. They want to keep it as an open sore, as an affront to the United Nations, and as a weapon against Israel. Arab leaders don't give a damn whether the refugees live or die." This observation that was made back in the 50s by Galloway is still relevant today, and actually the quote itself actually got into a congressional testimony in the 1950s, and I would argue that that clearly did not win Galloway any friends, and of course consequently he was forced to retire, fired. Any UNRWA official who's aired UNRWA's dirty laundry over the past 7 decades is no longer part of the scene. Refugee status and UNRWA at large has maintained and safeguarded the one single issue, as an ambassador stated, that maintains and fuels and guarantees the conflict will never end. Palestinian refuginess, I would argue, is synonymous to Palestinian identity. To argue to a Palestinian refugee you're no longer a refugee, you're no longer a Palestinian. And so the entire understanding of this narrative, again, using words like right, the word right has been seen as a divine right, and interpreted by observers and by Palestinians themselves. Ergo, no Palestinian leader, from Arafat all the way to Mahmoud Abbas, has ever had a full mandate to give up what is perceived to be as this right. Case in point, when Mahmoud Abbas and Abu Mazen has gone to the United Nations, which he's gone time after time, he will say, "I want a Palestinian state tomorrow," but in the same sentence he will say, "I'm not giving up the right of return," knowing it's a catch-22, that this will actually never be resolved, but again, thus putting the onus on the state of Israel. American foreign policy in the 50s and 60s was rooted in 3 issues, the 3 R's, I would define them: reintegration, repatriation, and resettlement. None of those issues have been achieved, and I would argue when it came to American foreign policy with the case study of the Palestinian issue, we've gone against our own American foreign policy. The W has kindly been translated within the narrative of UNRWA, the acronym of UNRWA, into works, which has been kindly translated into education. That education has been the primary function of UNRWA for its existence, and continues to educate to this right from generation to generation. What you see within the collective understanding of UNRWA, which I think is critical, to look at the configuration of this mechanism, is that by allowing UNRWA to keep continuing to exist, UNRWA continues to fuel that same narrative. So when you go and ask UNRWA officials, and when I've done so, and you've asked individuals who've worked for UNRWA, they will claim kindly, we will never cease to exist until the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic is resolved. While at the same time, they are the same gatekeeper of the problem that continues to fester. So this is where this policy issue plays into the conversation at large. One needs to understand, I think, and this is part of what the difference is between this side of the Atlantic Ocean and the Israeli side of the issue, which is part of, I think that we now have an opportunity, because I think there's more of an opening within the Netanyahu government to look closely at UNRWA's usefulness, is that American foreign policy our funding of UNRWA at large has been rooted in the existing of the numbers of refugees. So every year when UNRWA goes to Congress, and it does, UNRWA demands that we need money to take care of the betterment of Palestinian refugees. And the numbers continue to grow from one generation to the next generation based on the supposed growth of Palestinian refugees. On the Israeli side of the argument, which is worth noting why there has not been much policy movement on this matter, the argument has been that as complicated as UNRWA is, as difficult as UNRWA is, whatever UNRWA does, if they don't do it, it's going to be Israel's responsibility. That's been the catch-22, and some of the pushback we've received from our Israeli colleagues on this issue. I argue that this is, while it is a concern to Israel, and of course, we want to help our Israeli colleagues on this issue, it's an American issue. We fund a third of UNRWA's annual budget a year, amounting to more, over the years, it's been between $380 and over $400 million annually that goes into UNRWA funding. And without any kind of transparency or accountability as to where this money actually goes. I would argue that what needs to happen at this point in time in order to break this monopoly, which UNRWA indeed has over the totality of, I would say, Palestinian society at one point, but also the Palestinian Authority. From a budgetary standpoint, the PA currently double dips. There's money that goes to USAID, and there's money that goes into UNRWA. And UNRWA, to that end, which is very critical, is the largest employer of Palestinians. So you have a total of 30,000 individuals estimately working for UNRWA. It is a phenomenal case study where the client has hijacked a service provider, in contrast to UNHCR, which only employs between close to 5,000 to 6,000 individuals for refugees worldwide. And so all those individuals, to my mind, if there is going to be any kind of movement for a Palestinian state, should actually be civil servants of the Palestinian state to be, and not working for UNRWA. So this is kind of where this double dipping has taken place, in particular on the educational front, where former PA ministers of education have been former superintendents of UNRWA schools, and so there is that overlap, and close within the DNA. So that has to shift. To break this monopoly, and I think that ultimately UNRWA has long outlived its usefulness. We need to break with other potential UN agencies. We could do it with other parallel groups, and in order to kind of get some kind of sense of transparency and accountability to where all these projects are going. I would point to that end to our friends to the north. The Canadians for seven years agreed to defund from UNRWA. And one of the reasons they defunded from UNRWA under the Harper government, which was one of the first countries to actually stop Western funding on the issue of UNRWA, was because they could get no accountability and transparency on UNRWA issues. And interestingly enough, they also cited a report that was produced by the EU, of all places, on Palestinian incitement in Palestinian textbooks. They agreed to give money to the Palestinian Authority where they could get some accountability and transparency, but not to UNRWA. Unfortunately, they re-upped again with Harper's departure of government, but it's a good model to look at as far as looking forward. I would say today that UNRWA currently today acts as a shadow government for the Palestinian Authority, and we need to start breaking this monopoly by starting to allow them to move beyond this stasis, which they've been in, within refugee mentality. And for this to happen, again, the right of return has to end. That has to be the ultimate goal. By freezing monies that we've done, and I support that, and I've supported the decision made by the administration as far as where these monies have gone. If the ultimate goal is not going to be ending the right of return, then we're basically putting a lot of band-aids on this issue, and the problem will continue to fester. So it's not going to be a question of 5 to 6 million individuals. It will be a question of 15 million individuals at the rate we're going by the expansion, why everybody's a refugee based on the father, the mother, the grandparents, the resurrection of the dead, and everybody else. So with the time that I have, I know I went over time. This is what needs to happen in order to change this narrative, but this represents the number one issue. This is the number one issue in the conflict that continues to ensure the conflict will never end. The territorial issues are secondary, but the right of return is the number one issue that maintains and guarantees this conflict. And the opportunity is now where we have friends here in the States to make that happen, as well as in Israel. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Shifter said that UNRWA is the major obstacle to peace, to a peace agreement. Asaf just said that it ensures the conflict will never end. I agree with both those assessments, and I will take it yet a step further. I would call it the heart of the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's not Jerusalem, it is, to give you its full name, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Middle East. Asaf suggested that Works has been replaced by education. I would suggest it's been replaced by welfare. It's the United Nations Relief and Welfare Agency. It's what keeps things going. Now, some basic facts, some of which you've heard, we're putting it all together. It was founded in 1949, before the UN Human Rights Commission. It was 726,000 according to UNRWA numbering in 1949. It's 5.3 million today. 1.7 million live in 59 so-called refugee camps. There are 5 fields, the 5 geographic areas, which are West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. If a Palestinian lives elsewhere outside those 5 areas, then UNHRC is responsible. Has a $1.4 billion budget a year, employs 33,000 people, and is the largest UN agency. There are many problems with UNRWA. You've heard them discussed. It's bad behavior, incitement, helping with jihad and the like. The waste of resources, the corruption, the self-perpetuating UNRWA bureaucracy, the fact that there are 35 times more per capita bureaucrats dealing with UNRWA than with UNHCR clients, the anti-Zionism and the eternal dole and healthiness of that. But I would like to focus on one area in particular, which is the endless refugee status. You've heard mention of this already. The original UNRWA definition, which again calls for, defines the refugees, a Palestine refugee is the technical term, are those whose normal place of residence was Palestine between June 1946 and May 1948, and who lost both their homes and means of livelihood as a result of the 1948 Arab-Israeli conflict. That's a fairly innocuous description, but over time has fundamentally changed. The descendants, as you heard, were added in the 1960s, children, grandchildren, and so on. Even if only one parent. And originally it was just one male parent, and later it was either male or female parent. Secondly, 1967 refugees were added in the aftermath of that war. Thirdly, nationality didn't matter. You could be a Jordanian national and yet still a refugee. And fourthly, you could live in the West Bank and Gaza, which is normally considered Palestine, and yet still be a refugee. So, the result of this is that the numbers that the UNRWA counts are well over 5 million. And the Arab governments are complicit in this. For example, Lebanon, there are 175 stateless Palestinians who are prohibited from attending public school, owning property, and improving their housing stock. Because if they feel too comfortable in Lebanon, they won't be a dagger against Israel. In Saudi Arabia, there are 500,000 stateless Palestinians. According to a 2005 ruling, any expatriate who has 10 years of residence in Saudi Arabia may apply for Saudi citizenship, with one exception, and Palestinians. Don't get too comfortable, Palestinians. We need you to be there as a dagger against Israel. Now, I would argue to you that both sides suffer, all suffer from this. Palestinians suffer from this because they retain this sense of victimhood, exclusion, self-pity, and nihilism. The refugee status cannot be shed. They cannot see themselves as settled. A young person growing up in Amman, Jordan, will think of himself as a foreigner there, as really belonging to Haifa. It doesn't allow for a full life. It creates an ever-larger pool of anguish and discontent. It is bad for Palestinians. It is obviously bad for Israel. This growing body, this growing population that is fostered through textbooks and through other means to adopt a cult of death and to see Israel as the permanent enemy. Therefore, the goal has to be to change the definition. Partly the descendancy, partly the nationality. If you're Jordanian or any other citizen, you're not a refugee. Partly the geography. If you live in the West Bank and Gaza, you're not a refugee because you're home. If you look at American law and American policy, that's what it requires. In other words, you don't need any fancy new legislation. American law says the refugee is the person who seeks refuge and the minor descendant. No grandchildren, great-grandchildren. American law says if you have nationality, such as Jordanian, you're not a refugee. American policy says if you're in the West Bank and Gaza and you're Palestinian, you are home. So, what we need to do is apply American law and American policy. This is not as easy as it sounds. My organization, Willie's Forum, has been at this since 2010. We've been working primarily here in the Congress, finding members who are sympathetic to this, demanding that the executive branch, the State Department, make some movement in this area. For example, to take a census of actual refugees, might be the figure 20,000. It's a guess, it's an estimate. What is the actual number who fit American criteria? The State Department. Well, it was a member of the House who asked for this. Sorry, it was a member of the Senate, former Senator Kirk, who asked for it, demanded it, it's in legislation. And the State Department first classified it and then sent it to the House. So it disappeared for several years. There's a great deal of obfuscation and resistance. There's a general feeling that you can't touch this issue until everything else is settled. But as I think you've heard several compelling arguments that no, you can't settle everything until this is done. So what we need is for the U.S. government to inform UNRWA in its annual contract that we don't recognize these people as refugees. We're willing to send money, but these are Palestinians worthy of our support, but they're not refugees. I think that would have a tremendous impact on the so-called refugees, the fake refugees. It would improve their standing, improve their place in life, it would allow them to settle, it would allow them to begin having normal lives. It would be good for them as individuals. It would be good for Israel, obviously. It would reduce the hostility towards the Jewish state. So we've been going at this without change for decades and decades. The time has come, stimulated by the holding back of the 65 million. That's not the solution. The Belgians came and offered 23 million. UNRWA's got a campaign about dignity that will probably get much more than 65 million. Money is not the key here, it's the definition. It's the illegality from an American viewpoint, and by the way, from a European viewpoint, Japanese viewpoint, from the great majority of the funders' viewpoints, what UNRWA is doing is illegal. Now, you can't get rid of UNRWA. It's a UN General Assembly agency. There's no way that's going to happen. But you can get UNRWA to make changes. The descendancy change in the mid-1960s was an UNRWA change. It was not a UNGA change. It was an internal bureaucratic change done with the acquiescence of the United States. these changes can be pushed on if the donor countries get together and if there's the will to do it, if there's an understanding that no, the Arab-Israeli conflict doesn't have to be resolved for this to be dealt with, quite the reverse, this needs to be dealt with in order for the particularly Palestinian Israeli conflict to be addressed. Thank you.
One of the big debates has been as far as UNRWA's complacency with terrorism, as well as the corruption issue. The part of it, and there is a violation of Section 301C, which relates to U.S. money that has tainted money to terrorism. That that if a donor oversteps those issues or violate those rules, then those monies will not go through. One of the main sources of tension has been on the issue of the watch list of the individuals that UNRWA employs regarding their, the corruption and the terrorist elements. To that end, the problem has been that UNRWA has refused to accept over the years the American watch list and the Israeli watch list, claiming that they're tainted. So the pool of people that they're looking at to begin with has been smaller than the individuals. Now, over the years, when I've been engaged in debates with UNRWA officials and employees, they've said, well, we've ratcheted up our look into individuals that have such ties, and we've tried to crack down on some of the terrorism, though if you look historically speaking, every time Israel has been forced to go into Gaza, Protective Edge, and others, you've seen UNRWA rockets and caches of rockets being found in UNRWA schools and things of the sort that illustrate part of that issue. That's one problem related to the vetting of the individuals. Related to the issue of the corruption part of it, going to Daniel's point before, when Kirk was still a congressman, and even before, the number one thing that Kirk demanded was an audit. Tell me where the money is going. Can you tell me how many laptops you bought, how many pencils and whatnot? And when Kirk demanded that, as similar to other international agencies, similar to the United Nations, they couldn't believe anybody had the audacity to ask where our money is going, and so that has been refused. I've been to the archive. It's very, very hard to figure out exactly where the money is going, how it's being transferred, and how they funnel the money. It's one big pool of money that's a big black hole. That's part of what I was saying before, as far as breaking this monopoly of getting the money and trying to get some kind of accountability as to what they're actually doing with these sets of monies. And as Daniel mentioned, the welfare aspect that pulls into one part, the education, but they can't give you a receipt to show that one service bought you, and here's your product. So those two issues are tied.
UNRWA is the largest entity in the UN system. It has 30,000 employees, and all of that is really being handled in a way so as to have these employees continue at work. There's no American investigation of that. It's indicated Senator Kirk recommended it. It was that.
The official UN statistic of the number of refugees, Palestinian refugees, in 1949 was 726,000. That includes some Jews as well. Ephraim Karsh, in his book Palestine Betrayed, goes through village by village, town by town, and concludes the actual number was more like 630,000. So fewer, but not by certainly not by an order of magnitude. On your second point, to reiterate, the UNRWA definition of a Palestine refugee is someone whose normal place of residence was Palestine between June 1946 and May 1948. In other words, you didn't have to be there very long, just 2-3 years before the war. You didn't have to be there in the 1920s, you didn't have to be there in the 1860s, or your family didn't have to be there. It was very specifically this short period of 2 years from 46 to 48, in part for the reasons you just pointed to, which is to say there was massive immigration. Massive immigration of Jews, massive immigration of Muslims. I would however, resist, you were saying they didn't belong there. They came in looking for economic opportunity and found it. They are legitimately there. I don't think it serves much purpose at this point to note that someone's grandfather came to the area in the 1930s or 20s. It's now 2018. They've been there for a while. The point is that the Palestinians, I accept that term, must recognize and accept that there is a state of Israel, that is a Jewish state. Once they do that, there won't be a conflict. However, since the Mufti in 1921, Mufti Amin al-Husseini, began the project of rejectionism, of rejection of anything Jewish, Zionist, Israeli, and the like, the Palestinians had not done so. And that is the problem today, of which UNRWA is one facet. Well, it's not coincidental that my organization started in this building. We've not gone to the UN, we've not gone to the Arab countries. We don't expect much of a sympathetic hearing there. We do expect that American taxpayers will be reluctant to see their money go for this cause, and that the representatives here will pay attention to that. So we're looking at the donors to force change on the recipients. We are not calling for the end of the funding of UNRWA. We're calling for donor countries to say, we're giving you money, but these are not refugees. And indeed, UNRWA has a program where it gives money, it funds non-refugees as well. So we're saying, these are not refugees. We want the U.S. government to say to UNRWA, we're giving you the money, but these are not refugees. And in part, we're staying away from the money because, as you heard earlier, the government of Israel wants that money to go there, at least to the West Bank, and also to Gaza. So if you have the government of Israel coming out against you and saying, as it has many times in the past, we don't want this, it will fail. My former colleague Stephen Rosen did a study of efforts in Congress to stop the funding. Between, I think it was 2003 and 2014, there was roughly one effort a year, and none of them went anywhere, because the government of Israel said, no, we want the money to go. So money is not the answer, it's not practical, and it's not going to address the issue of identity. Because even if you took away the money, a Palestinian child born today of white parentage will be a refugee, which affects and diminishes that person's life and continues the conflict. This is a new topic you're asking about, namely Israeli towns in the West Bank. Yes, the UN doesn't like them, but whether you like them or not, I am certain that they have not displaced anyone. They've generally gone to hilltops and unused land. So it's a very contentious issue, but no one argues that they have actually gone in and pushed people out of their houses and replaced them. So that's not a topic. No, the Europeans and Japanese and others don't have precisely the same wording as we do, but the gist of their legislation is similar. All governments define refugees as being the refugee and the minor dependent of some, what exactly a minor is, be 18 years or 21 years, but they're all in agreement that refugee status does not descend from generation to generation until the end of time. All of them agree that there is an end to refugee status when you take on the nationality of a country. All of them agree that the West Bank and Gaza are the putative home of Palestine. So there's no argument. There might be technical differences, but there's no argument.
I'm afraid this particular point, as far as the UN Security Council is concerned, you will not be able to get the necessary 8 votes for a redefinition of this term. But the fact of the matter is that, as far as the United States is concerned, you can simply say something that is not acceptable. As far as the UN is concerned, the chances are, by the way, that China usually votes on the other side, so China would probably also veto that resolution that would be the predefined term. The other aspect of it is we need 8 votes to get it. And just add one thing with regard to the question of how the matter can be ultimately resolved, and that is by reaching understanding among all the key players that funding, the United States would make funding available if a resettlement program were agreed to. And if it were not, the United States would not be prepared to fund it. That would be a way of really putting it to that and a country like Jordan, for example, would be very much concerned that would want an agreement of resettlement. As a matter of fact, I think it may very well be the way things are working out at this particular point in terms of the relations between Israel and some of the key members in the Arab League in the region. It may be possible to reach such an agreement. And by the way, it was worth mentioning that in the year 2000, when the negotiations were going on under the auspices of President Clinton, I think as these discussions came to an end, something was proposed which were known as the Clinton parameters. And in the Clinton parameters, there was a very clear provision which said that right of return is over, and these people have to be resettled. And as a matter of fact, my understanding is that President Clinton at that particular point was in touch with Canada, Australia, and other countries to get their willingness to accept refugees. So the point is that if we look for a solution, it needs to be one that we work out, by which we simply say, we're not going to fund this anymore unless a resettlement program of the kind that the High Commission for Refugees has would be acceptable. And in that connection, let me also mention that the present Secretary General of the United Nations used to be the High Commissioner for Refugees, and he actually reorganized the High Commissioner's office. So he would be the kind of person who may very well be personally sympathetic. Of course, it's necessary to get other parties to come to an agreement on that. But that is, it seems to me, where this